We are getting some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
For 58 days, Savannah Guthrie spoke carefully. She appeared on national television. She stood beside law enforcement. She asked the public for help, but she never crossed one line. She never described what investigators were really looking at inside that house. Until now, when people hear the word confession, they expect something dramatic, a breakdown, a secret revealed, a name spoken aloud. That is not what happened here. Savannah did not confess guilt. She confessed something more subtle. She confirmed where the investigation is actually centered. And once you understand what she acknowledged and what she did not, the shape of this case changes. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, disappeared from inside her daughter Annie's Tucson home on February 1, 2026. There was no forced entry. No confirmed vehicle departure captured on neighborhood cameras. No street-level footage placing Nancy outside that property after her last known sighting. For weeks, law enforcement emphasized ransom notes, outside threats, and investigative leads that stretched beyond the neighborhood. But quietly, the geography never moved. The wash behind Annie's property remained where it always was, and then civilians walked it. A YouTuber known as Exploring with Jim documented clothing in that drainage channel. Not once. Twice. Same corridor, same natural channel feeding directly off the back fence line of the property where Nancy was last seen alive. Savannah did not initially comment on those finds. That silence was noticeable, because Savannah is not an ordinary family member navigating grief. She is a veteran journalist. She understands framing. She understands what a single sentence can do to a national narrative. And she understands that what is not said often carries more weight than what is. When she returned to television after the commissioner used the word breakthrough, her language shifted. She did not dismiss the clothing in the wash. She did not redirect the focus back to ransom communications. She did not suggest investigators were chasing distant leads. Instead, she acknowledged that investigators were concentrating on the property and its surroundings. That phrase matters. Property and surroundings. That is not a national search. That is not a multi-state conspiracy. That is geography narrowed to a defined perimeter. When Savannah said those words, she did not accuse anyone. She did not describe the wash directly. But she aligned herself with the same location the community had been analyzing for weeks. For 58 days, the public narrative suggested this case could stretch anywhere. After that appearance, the narrative pulled inward. Let's talk about the wash. A wash in Tucson is not a small ditch. It is a natural drainage corridor carved by decades of desert runoff. It sits below grade. It is overgrown. It is unlit. It runs behind homes without appearing on any standard surveillance grid. No ring camera points into it. No municipal camera monitors it. If someone moved through it at night, there would be no digital footprint. When civilians conducted grid searches of that wash and documented clothing deeper inside the channel, not near the edge, not visible from the yard, but further down, that created a pattern. One item can be dismissed. Two separate discoveries in the same corridor begin to form structure. Savannah did not use the word wash. But when she acknowledged that investigators were focusing where Nancy was last known to be, she implicitly confirmed something important. The center of gravity has not shifted. It remains tied to that property. Here is what makes that acknowledgement powerful. For weeks, criticism of the Pima County Sheriff's Department has circulated publicly. A no-confidence vote from within the department. Former officials speaking on record. A former sheriff stating the crime scene had been permanently corrupted. In that climate, any family member could distance themselves from the investigation's direction. Savannah did not. She aligned with it. That alignment is not emotional. It is strategic. If the clothing in the wash had no relevance, the easiest path would have been dismissal. If the location were a distraction, she could have redirected attention outward. She did neither. She stayed centered. Now consider the broader investigative logic. Clothing does not cluster randomly in a drainage channel. Items carried by water move downhill. When two finds occur within the same corridor, investigators use a method called reverse tracing. You follow the channel upstream. You narrow the origin zone. In this case, upstream leads back toward the property boundary. That is not an accusation. It is physics. Savannah understands optics. She understands that if the public perceives this case as a national mystery while the evidence sits behind a fence line, credibility erodes. So when she acknowledged the investigative focus remaining local, She did something that looks small but is not. She stabilized the narrative around the same geography the physical evidence points toward. There is another detail embedded in her appearance. She referenced investigators standing over a specific location inside the home, not moving casually through rooms, standing over something. That language suggests concentration. Concentration suggests defined points of interest. Combine that with clothing discovered in a defined outdoor corridor connected to the same property. You do not have a confession of a crime. You have a confession of focus. Savannah is telling the public, in controlled language, that this investigation has narrowed. Not expanded, not drifted, narrowed. For 58 days, the story felt diffuse. Ransom notes, out-of-state leads, speculation. Now, quietly, it feels geographic. The property, the wash, the defined corridor. The breakthrough announcement used a word that carries weight. Savannah's appearance gave that word direction. And that is the shift, not an admission of wrongdoing. An admission that the center of this case is exactly where it started. Behind that house. When investigators say a case is narrowing, they rarely explain what that looks like. Narrowing is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is mathematical. It begins with location. In Tucson, washes are not decorative features of the landscape. They are functional drainage systems carved by gravity and time. When monsoon storms move through the desert, water does not spread evenly across yards and streets. It funnels, downhill, through channels, carrying loose debris with it. Clothing deposited into a wash does not float randomly in every direction. It follows the grade. It moves with runoff. It settles where terrain slows the flow. That is the physics investigators rely on. When a single item is found outdoors, alternative explanations are easy. Wind carried it. Someone dropped it weeks earlier. It washed in from somewhere else. But when two separate discoveries appear in the same drainage corridor, weeks apart, those explanations begin to strain. Because randomness does not usually cluster. Clustering signals origin. This is where reverse tracing comes in. Retired federal investigators have described this method clearly. You do not start with the item. You start with the terrain. You map the grade. You calculate direction of flow. Then you follow that line backward, not emotionally, physically, upstream. In this case, upstream leads toward the back fence line of the property where Nancy Guthrie was last seen alive. That does not determine guilt. It defines geography. Savannah's recent appearance acknowledged that investigators are concentrating on the property and its surroundings. That phrase now carries weight because the surroundings are no longer abstract. They are mapped. Let's consider timing. The first clothing find occurred weeks before March 28th. It was documented in place, reported to authorities. The second find, deeper in the same channel, followed after a systematic grid search was repeated. The fact that the wash had to be walked deliberately is significant. Standard perimeter searches often prioritize visible routes, roads, yards, driveways, neighboring properties. Washes are different. They sit below sight lines. They require descent. If they are not specifically placed on the grid, they are missed. Once placed on the grid and walked methodically, evidence surfaced. Twice, Savannah did not argue that the wash was irrelevant. She did not question the credibility of the civilian who found the items. Instead, she stayed aligned with investigative focus. That alignment matters, because families under stress sometimes distance themselves from developments they believe are misleading. Savannah did the opposite. She anchored her language to the same zone the physical evidence points toward. Now step back and examine the surveillance record. No ring camera captured Nancy exiting the front of the property. No neighbor's footage showed her walking down the street. No license plate reader logged a departure from the driveway at the relevant hour. If she left that property, she did not leave along routes covered by traditional surveillance. The back of the property is different. The wash is not illuminated. It is not covered. Movement through it at night leaves no digital trail. That gap is not speculative. It is structural. When investigators evaluate missing persons cases with no body and no confirmed exit route, they look for unseen corridors. The wash qualifies. Clothing found within it strengthens that evaluation. Now let us talk about pattern density. If clothing entered that wash from a distant property, gravity would disperse it along the channel. It would not neatly collect in a defined corridor near one upstream origin point. Two finds in proximity suggest proximity to origin. Again, this is terrain analysis, not accusation. Savannah's decision not to deflect attention from that terrain indicates something else. Confidence. If the wash were a false trail, she could have said so. If investigators believed the items were unrelated, she could have clarified that publicly. Instead, her language kept the perimeter tight. Property and surroundings. Those words are controlled, but they are not accidental. Now consider institutional context. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has faced public scrutiny during this investigation. A no-confidence vote from within its own personnel. Statements from former officials raising concerns about early crime scene management. In such an environment, public trust is fragile. Savannah's alignment with investigative geography serves a purpose. It reinforces that despite institutional turbulence, the direction of the case remains coherent around place. Not rumor, not distant conspiracy. Place. There is also a psychological component. When a family member speaks publicly, their words carry emotional authority. If Savannah had suggested investigators were looking in the wrong area, public focus would shift. She did not. Instead, she reinforced that the investigation is concentrated close to where Nancy was last seen. For viewers who have followed this case for nearly 2 months, that is not a small clarification. It is an admission that the evidence is local. Now imagine what happens next. If forensic testing confirms that the clothing recovered from the wash is linked to Nancy, through DNA, fiber comparison, or biological material, the case gains a defined outdoor scene connected to the property. That is transformative. If the testing rules the clothing out, the geography still tells investigators where not to look, forcing resources elsewhere. Either outcome moves the case. But Savannah's language suggests that investigators believe the location remains relevant. She did not broaden the frame. She tightened it. That is the quiet confession embedded in her appearance. Not of a crime, of direction. The center of this case has not shifted outward. It has circled inward. Behind the house. Into the wash. Into terrain that produces no camera footage, but now holds physical evidence. When a seasoned journalist speaks about her own family's crisis, every word carries 2 layers. There is the emotional layer, the daughter asking for help. And there is the structural layer, the communicator who understands how investigations unfold. Savannah Guthrie has spent decades asking difficult questions on national television. She understands timing. She understands narrative framing. She understands how a single sentence can influence public perception. That experience does not disappear when the story becomes personal. It becomes sharper. Former federal agents have publicly confirmed that in high-profile cases, media appearances by family members are often coordinated with investigators. Not scripted in the theatrical sense, but aligned strategically. Law enforcement does not release details casually. Families do not reveal investigative focus without awareness of consequence. So when Savannah speaks, investigators are listening. And when she chooses not to speak about something specific, that silence often carries intent. Let's look carefully at what she has not addressed directly. She has not dismissed the clothing found in the wash. She has not described it as unrelated. She has not cautioned the public against focusing on that geography. Instead, she acknowledged investigative concentration on the property and its surroundings. That is not defensive language. It is calibrated. There is a difference between protecting family privacy and protecting investigative integrity. Savannah's public posture appears to lean toward the latter. If investigators believe evidence in the wash is meaningful, public commentary must be measured. Too much detail can contaminate witness testimony. Too much denial can undermine prosecutorial positioning later. In criminal investigations, silence is often not absence. It is containment. Now consider how coordinated communication typically works in federal cases. When the FBI is involved, messaging becomes part of strategy. Certain details are released to provoke response. Certain details are withheld to test consistency. Certain geographic references are emphasized to signal direction without disclosing evidence. Savannah's phrasing did not wander. She did not speculate. She did not widen the search beyond the local perimeter. That suggests alignment. Alignment implies awareness. Now let's consider the broader narrative. For weeks, public attention was pulled toward ransom notes and external threats. Those leads shaped early investigative posture. Law enforcement responded to communications. Resources were allocated accordingly. But over time, those threads appeared to lose traction publicly. What replaced them was not a new external suspect. It was renewed focus on location. Location does not trend nationally the way ransom notes do. It is quieter, less dramatic, but far more stable. When Savannah acknowledged that investigators are focusing close to where Nancy was last seen, she effectively confirmed that the center of gravity remains geographic. And that has implications, because geography does not lie easily. If clothing in the wash is connected to Nancy, it places physical evidence outside the home, but within the property's environmental boundary. That becomes a defined corridor. A defined corridor becomes a route. A route becomes a narrative of movement. In no-body missing person cases, movement patterns are everything. Without confirmed sighting beyond the property, the route must begin where visibility ends. The wash is where visibility ends. Savannah's silence on specific forensic findings may also indicate something else: pending results. Families aligned with investigators are often advised not to discuss evidence before testing concludes. Premature statements can compromise legal proceedings later. If testing is ongoing, silence protects integrity. Now let us examine the psychology of narrative control. When institutions face credibility challenges, as the Pima County Sheriff's Department has during this investigation, families sometimes compensate by reinforcing investigative focus publicly. Savannah's language appears to do that. She did not question the department's geographic concentration. She did not challenge the commissioner's use of the word breakthrough. She let it stand. That posture signals confidence that something substantive supports the announcement. If nothing did, distancing would be safer. Instead, she stayed aligned. Alignment between family messaging and investigative geography often indicates that key evidence has already shaped internal understanding. The public simply has not been briefed fully yet. There is another subtle point. Savannah referenced investigators concentrating inside the home over a defined location. That interior focus, combined with exterior evidence in the wash, creates a corridor between inside and outside. That corridor is investigative gold. It bridges environment, interior event, exterior trace. When those 2 points connect, prosecutors gain structure. Savannah may not describe that connection explicitly, but her acknowledgement of focused investigation suggests it exists. Now ask a careful question. If investigators believed Nancy left the property under her own power through the front of the home, would the messaging center so tightly on the property and surroundings? Probably not. If investigators believed an external abductor removed her via vehicle from the street, would the wash behind the house become relevant? Unlikely. The fact that focus remains local implies that movement, if movement occurred, intersected the back of the property. Again, this is structural reasoning, not accusation. Savannah's controlled messaging suggests she understands that structure, and she is choosing not to disrupt it. That choice is meaningful. It indicates that the investigation is not scattered. It is converging. When a public official uses the word breakthrough in a case like this, it should mean one thing: alignment, not hope, not momentum, not speculation. Alignment. Alignment between physical evidence, geography, and timeline. For 58 days, this case felt fragmented. There were ransom communications. There were institutional questions. There were searches that seemed broad and inconclusive. But geography never moved. Nancy Guthrie was last seen alive inside her daughter Annie's home in Tucson. There was no confirmed forced entry. There was no confirmed vehicle departure caught on camera. There was no verified sighting of her walking down a street. And now, there is clothing documented in a wash that runs directly off the back of that property. Twice. Savannah Guthrie did not use the word wash. She did not describe the clothing in detail, but she did something more significant. She confirmed that investigators are focused on the property and its surroundings. That phrase is the quiet admission. Because once the surroundings include a defined drainage channel where physical items have surfaced, the investigation becomes spatially anchored. and spatial anchoring changes everything. Let's talk plainly about what happens next in a case like this. If the clothing recovered from that wash is submitted for forensic testing, and it should be, investigators will look for DNA, fibers, biological residue, soil comparison, environmental consistency. If the items contain Nancy's DNA, the case shifts immediately. For the first time, there would be confirmed physical evidence linking Nancy to a defined outdoor corridor connected directly to the property where she disappeared. That is not abstract. That is prosecutable geography. Because once you have a confirmed outdoor deposit, reverse tracing becomes courtroom testimony. Experts can explain grade slope, water flow, deposition behavior, clustering probability. The wash would no longer be background terrain. It would become a documented route, and a route defines movement. Movement defines narrative. If the testing does not connect the clothing to Nancy, the location still matters, because negative results eliminate a possibility. They tell investigators where the evidence trail does not lead. Either way, the location is now part of the formal record. That is why Savannah's alignment with the geographic focus is so important. She is not expanding the story outward. She is stabilizing it inward. Now consider what this means in practical terms. If Nancy did not leave through the front of the property, and no surveillance places her there, and if the back of the property connects to a wash that produces physical evidence, investigators must reconcile those two realities. There are only a limited number of scenarios. Either Nancy moved through that terrain herself, or someone moved her. An 84-year-old woman navigating rocky, uneven desert terrain at night under her own power would be unusual. Possible, but unusual. Movement through that channel requires intention or familiarity. It is not a sidewalk. It is not lit. It is not smooth. Which brings us back to Savannah. Her public messaging suggests that investigators are not chasing distant explanations. They are concentrating on defined geography. That concentration signals confidence that something within that perimeter is actionable. Savannah has decades of experience managing information under scrutiny. If she believed the investigative focus was misplaced, her language would reflect caution. Instead, it reflects steadiness. Steadiness implies knowledge, not of guilt, of direction. There is another layer here that deserves careful attention. When institutions face scrutiny, and the Pima County Sheriff's Department has, families sometimes lose faith publicly. Savannah has not. She has not distanced herself from the department's announcement. She has not questioned the use of the word breakthrough. She has let it stand. That posture suggests that something tangible exists behind the scenes. Breakthroughs in cases like this do not usually mean a confession. They mean convergence. Convergence between what investigators suspected and what physical evidence now supports. If internal analysis has already connected the wash findings to Nancy, even preliminarily, Savannah's public steadiness makes sense. She would not want to jeopardize pending forensic work. She would not want to influence jury pools. She would not want to contaminate witness statements. Silence can be protective. Now consider the timing. Savannah is scheduled to appear publicly again. If forensic results are pending, her next appearance may reveal tone shifts, not explicit detail. Tone. Confidence versus caution. Focus versus diffusion. Families aligned with investigators often telegraph momentum subtly before formal announcements occur. The commissioner used the word breakthrough. Savannah stabilized the narrative around the property. Those two actions, placed together, form structure. Not chaos, structure. The wash is no longer a speculative detail raised by civilians alone. It is now implicitly acknowledged within the investigative perimeter. And once a location enters the official perimeter, it rarely exits without resolution. Let's return to the title of this story. Savannah Guthrie finally confessed what happened to Nancy Guthrie. She did not confess a crime. She confessed clarity. She confirmed where this case lies, not in distant ransom notes, not in national mystery, in a defined stretch of land behind a house, in a drainage corridor, in terrain that produces no camera footage but now holds documented physical evidence. That acknowledgement is subtle, but it is powerful. Because once the public understands that the center of gravity has not moved, pressure concentrates. Pressure for forensic results. pressure for transparency, pressure for alignment between words and evidence. Nancy Guthrie has been missing since February 1st. The geography has not changed. The wash still runs behind that property. The clothing is still documented. And the word breakthrough now demands substance. If you have information related to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the appropriate law enforcement tip line or the FBI field office directly. Cases like this do not resolve through noise. They resolve through alignment. And alignment, once complete, leaves very little room for uncertainty. This is no longer about where investigators are looking. Savannah has made that clear. It is about what they are about to confirm.